Hello and welcome to Insights with me, Lynne O'Donnell. I'm joined by Javed Noorani, who I consider to be the premier expert on the mining sector generally, and in particular the sector in Afghanistan, its minerals landscape and its potential, and of course the corruption that has been a hallmark of the sector in Afghanistan for many years, not just during the Taliban era, but also during the Republic era. As a researcher, he's written for many publications and organisations and continues to do so. He also considers himself to be an activist for transparency and accountability in mining and for sustainable development. Have a listen. Javed, welcome and thank you for your time. You started in corruption monitoring and that led you to the mining sector. What's driven your interest in the mining and mineral sector of Afghanistan specifically and more generally?
Good morning. And thank you for having me today and your time. I started as a mining researcher within Integrity Watch Afghanistan right after I finished my master's from India. And so I was the sole researcher there, and I did my research. And then after a few publications, I was repeatedly asked by the president, to join MEC, which was the anti-corruption body. And on the twice I rejected it, and the third time he kind of issued a decree without, even consulting me. So that's how it started all. And my interest grew because I realized, that mining sector could actually change the fortune of the country with the kind of diversity we had, with the kind of global needs that were there for some of the minerals that we had. And at the end of the day, as an Afghan, I also wanted, to see Afghanistan transform from, uh, a conflict-driven country into a prosperous regional economic and security partner with other countries.
Indeed. Well, the prevailing cliche, which you've alluded to about Afghanistan, is the presence of trillions of dollars worth of minerals that could be the basis of a thriving economy in a prosperous country. And yet, where does this come from? Is it true? What does Afghanistan have in those hills?
Yes, so it's interesting because for the first time, the British are in 18th century discovered some minerals, and there are studies from the British India, where they would conduct, studies were conducted, and huge deposits of coal were discovered, and then with the arrival of Russians, and the Italians, and the French, and Americans. And again, the last time Americans did survey, they found, very good impressions of minerals across the country. At least 87 different minerals, And then you have hydrocarbon. You don't have all these in one geography. But then, they call it nature or divine, It's been kind of spread all over the country. If we, obviously, a geologist will tell you, whether it's $1 trillion or $1 billion, only if they put boots on the ground and do their surveys and discovery processes, the feasibility of the minerals. But initial impressions of those surveys show, yes, Afghanistan's got huge deposits. We cannot say whether it's trillion or 2 trillion or three, but certainly there are, huge potentials of, we have deposits and huge potential for development.
Mm. The Republic is gone. There was a lot of talk under Presidents Karzai and especially under President Ghani about developing, bringing in international organisations to do the work. But nothing ever happened. So the Republic is now gone and the Taliban have returned. How are things different?
It's true, both President Karzai and Dr. Ashraf Ghani tried to, kind of leverage the mineral resources of Afghanistan to see if we could kind of, bring in investment. But, genuine mining companies uh, always calculate risk of, investment first, before they go. And, those mining companies that believe in, development and sometimes transparency were not willing to come forward. Only, tainted companies like state-backed companies were willing because the risk was borne by the state, not the entities. So that's one. The second, yes, there was corruption in the previous regime, massive, at every level. And I see a lot of signs of corruption, right now in Afghanistan, when contracts are given out, contracts are implemented, revenue lost, and uh, institutions are not in place, to monitor, either contract out the minerals or monitor production, export, and everything, inflow of money. So the situation has not changed much.
Well, at least there was a semblance under the Republic governments of adhering to international norms of contract, coming up with the contracts, signing contracts, and going along with um, the uh, the type of expectations that the international community sector might have. The Taliban is as yet unrecognised as the government. So I'm wondering about what sort of expertise and capacity does the Taliban regime have for signing contracts? Is it just a level of exploitation from partners that want to come in? And after, if we think of the post Taliban era, how much credibility, legal weight will the current contracts have?
Yeah, so very loaded questions. If I missed some, please remind me if I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, so uh, true, the current regime, if I may start with that,
Mm.
as I said, neither the legal arrangement nor the institutional arrangements are in place, to move on with the sector, bring in investment and promote development. Forget about, talking about vision, but the kind of diversity of mineral and deposits we have, the country certainly needs a vision, for its development. So yes, there are a lot of contracts given out. Some countries have come forward and, put their proxies at front, to get contracts, and they've already got those contracts. These are not very good signs for Afghanistan. As an Afghan, as a researcher who's worked in Afghanistan for over 10 years, I don't think those are very prudent steps. So that's one side of it. Um, Contract signed, and what if there's a regime change again? What happens to them? Some of these countries can manage, to hold on to those contracts because they have influence, and they will continue to have influence. For example, now INAC regime changed, the contract is still there. Or, the iron deposits that have been contracted out to Iranian companies and their, some of their front people, front men, those will stay there. They will find their way, to work out those contracts if they're honest to develop. But I doubt, they want to hold on to those contracts on paper and, have the ownership of it. I doubt, that the Chinese would develop, INAC for the next 10 years. They've already spent, it's already 15 years, I guess, 20,
Mm.
10 more years until
Mm.
somebody forces them. The same would be with the Iranians. I doubt they would, develop it. 1 year has passed, I haven't heard any story of development of those mines yet.
Mm. Well, with INAC, you're referring to the massive copper deposit in Logar that the Chinese spent $3 billion on. My impression of that has been all along that it's really just a price and supply hedge for the Chinese. And they're as astute about watching the global price of copper as any trader. Um, but they've cut the ribbon on Mezainak how many times? Half a dozen times. I guess that's really just about the Taliban taking ownership of that landscape.
Yeah. So just a little, thing about INAC. They promised to Miss INAC, which is a massive copper deposit, and Chinese growing demand for copper. Like 3 years ago, their demand of copper was 50% of the global production. So
Mm,
that's increasing
mm,
with urbanization, with technology and all. There'll be more need for copper. It's as strategic as lithium is, if not less. That's one I wanted to kind of underline. So yeah, they keep cutting ribbons, and at the same time paying to government officials to make sure that they don't reflect the situation as fit for development.
mm,
So yeah, that will continue, as I said. And again, yeah, they want to keep an eye or manipulate the prices in London Metal Exchange to make sure the prices are in their favor.
mm.
So holding INAC is an important one with 11.3 million tons of pure copper.
Yep.
You get that kind of a deposit anywhere else.
Yes, indeed. Well, few countries that are rich in natural resources have managed to escape the so-called resource curse. And we can look at a number of African countries as a bad example of that. I don't know that Afghanistan has really been any different, even though very little exploitation has happened. Corruption was certainly a hallmark of the failed republic across the board, not just in the mining and minerals sector. And you did a lot of original and important research. Um, the most important research, I would say, in this field. How bad was it?
Uh, During the previous regime, it was really, really, really bad. To the extent that minister were unashamedly, they would not even blink about it. Go around, get bribes, meet Chinese in Dubai or, in Turkey, or meet other investors wherever they could, to bring them, take some money from them, give them data, illegally. So the level was really bad. Every MP directly or indirectly was getting some kickback from the mining sector. Some were operating big mines, with one or two exceptions. Corruption was at all levels during the Republic. Um, right now, as I said, some of the contracts that are given out, with the speed they're given out, the number that they're given out, these are not very good signs. They need to be, looked into. Who got what contract? How did he or she or get that contract? These are important. I don't know if I kind of deviated too much from your question. Do you want to kind of? Do you think I answered that?
Oh, yes, I think that the levels of corruption of the previous government are undeniable. And, we're talking about kickbacks in the mining sector and the involvement of ministry officials, minister level on down officials, that, you know, like, when you're sucking the money out instead of putting it in, of course it's going to collapse under its own weight. And I guess that's what happened, yeah?
Yeah, it did. It did. Um, I've along with doing research and keeping some information with myself. There was some so sensitive. I considered that as my duty, to pass it on to President Ghani, thinking that he would do so much about it. Um,
Mm.
at times, information was lost in this channel. I talked about the minister's corruption. Minister, going and appeasing Chinese. There's a huge conflict of interest. Minister getting prize, minister appointing his own people or her own people, a minister, getting her share or his share from the Northern Coal Enterprise, the minister, getting a trip financed by the Chinese. These were like so widespread, you didn't need to kind of dig in too much, to find that out.
Yeah.
It was
Mm.
at that level. And I think towards the end, President Ghani kind of started, saying, let's ignore this, it's so much, probably give up on that, but it was there. It was not only President Ghani, because right next to Ghani, President Ghani, were people. We blame, within the triangle that was operating around Ghani, President Ghani, two sides of the triangle are zoomed in. Everybody talks about it. The third one was, which is Salam Rahimi and his gang. Nobody talks about that. There was massive corruption uh, on that side. Most of the guys, now, um, either they pretend that they've not been seen doing corruption. uh, it was happening, and these people were influencing President Ghani, and until the republic collapsed. They never realized the red lines, the signs of collapse coming. They thought, the you know international community will perpetually finance not their regime but their corruption as well. So
Mm.
suddenly they woke up to finding themselves at the airport, some hanging from a plane, some bribing ways to get into a plane, to fly out of
Mm.
the country.
Mm. Yes, and the tragedy that surrounds that, um, and and now we have the tragedy of all of those people in denial about the role that they played in the collapse of the republic. But let's move on. China has always been the biggest potential customer and developer of Afghanistan's mineral and petrochemical resources. Throughout, I've always taken a great interest in natural resources, and from my time in China and China's growing interest in that sector globally. And it seems to me that there, the Chinese appetite for at least financial risk seems to be a lot bigger than that of the major global corporate players. Um, and there's a long relationship between China's government and the Taliban that would now appear to be paying off. Can you describe what's going on there?
Yeah, so if I may start with, the global competition over minerals, nobody denies that, the European, Canada, US, and China, and now increasingly other countries are locked into a massive, intense competition over mineral resources. And Afghanistan offers a lot, but Chinese interest is, in Afghanistan minerals is multiplied by two, because they're also trying to connect Afghanistan through Belt and Road, and mineral resources are very good, easy, low hanging fruit, to start with, and they show interest. That's one dimension of the Chinese interest in Afghanistan. And the second important side of it is, competition plus, trying to have influence in Afghanistan. If they connect Afghanistan through Belt and Road, uh, that's not where they will stop. Obviously elsewhere they've started with minerals, or a development package to develop infrastructure, and then move on to manufacturing sector, so the influence increases. And then the next level is, the Chinese coming with their banks to open in that country. And so once into the banks, they have a good picture of the financial system, and gradually a control over that uh, will kind of bring the country to its knees, or at least under its influence. That's one. State-backed Chinese companies now have huge appetite or potential for bearing risk because the state backs it. Let me talk about INAC, the Miss INAC contract, how they
Mm,
kicked out the best out of the competition. So the other company that very came very close to the Chinese one was the Kazakh company. They were moving head to head, with them. So what the Chinese did, they said, we'll pay $808 million as a bonus, cash bonus. There were so many conditions attached to that. They smartly, the evaluator of the proposals didn't look at those conditionalities. They said, "Wow, 808 million for a country like Afghanistan is huge. Oh, go ahead. Let's go ahead with this company." And they went ahead.
mm,
And later on, they found out, that cash was contingent upon, some government, Afghan government's responses and responsibilities and all. And then it was in installments. First would happen in after a year, and then second after 4 years, and then that's how it worked. They've not paid those $880 million in cash to the Afghan government. Some they have paid, but that's it. And they've held to the deposit for the past 2008. They signed it. I think now it's 2024, and they will continue to hold on to it.
mm.
So the one very very important thing that gives the Chinese companies an edge over all the big global mining companies is because the state kind of bears off of the risk, of investment in a country like Afghanistan. Probably they do the same in Africa, but that's
Mm.
how it works. Other mining companies, big mining companies, cannot uh, bear so much risk.
Oh, they have shareholders that they have to be accountable to. They can't just slosh the cash around in the same way.
Yeah.
Is one of the holdups? I remember the plan, the Chinese plan for Mezainak, seemed to be holistic in the way of the post-revolutionary development of certain areas and regions and cities of China rolled out. So there were promises of housing, employment, education, other infrastructure, and a railroad that would take the copper as it was developed on site up through Afghanistan and across the northern Wakhan corridor into China. It seemed like a huge ask, but it also seemed incredibly attractive at that time. Wow, look at all this potential development, not only of bricks and mortar, but also of human resources. Now I'm seeing uh, news footage of the development of the road through the Wakhan corridor, which has Chinese language signposts on it, however many kilometres to China on signposts that are broadcast on um, uh, Taliban propaganda television stations. Is this a part of it? Do you think is Afghanistan going to get infrastructure that suits the developmental needs of the country, or infrastructure that suits the uh, economic and resources needs of China?
Well, even during Republic, I was interested in Chinese infrastructure project in Afghanistan. I came across a discussion, that the Wakhan corridor was planned probably 15 years ago, and there was
Mm.
the discussion going on between people in Republic and the Chinese. So the discussion fell apart because strongmen in Kabul, uh, from the north, some wanted this corridor to go through Badakhshan directly all the way to Faizabad and to Kunduz and all. The other
Mm.
group wanted it, part of Badakhshan and then Panjshir and Kabul. So that's where the discussion stopped, or they couldn't agree on it. And now the Wakhan corridor is very important for China. We don't have much export. What will be export other than minerals? Yeah, so it suits the Chinese, and then I think it would be naive, to think that the Chinese are not thinking 20 years ahead in time.
Mm.
So all the infrastructure that they have kind of put on the Afghan map are not the work of a year. I mean, yesteryears. It probably a lot has gone into it before even they put it on the map. Yeah, so that's how I think. And Belt and Road looks now a reality to me. The way they're working on it, the way they're identifying deposits, and they want to invest in those deposits.
Do you think what's going on in Pakistan is an object lesson for what could happen to Chinese interests in Afghanistan? There's a lot of, I just spent a couple of months in Pakistan. The security for Chinese companies and personnel is very much compromised around development especially in the Baluchistan region. Um, do you think, and it has led to Chinese senior government officials threatening um, quite openly uh, to pull out of the infrastructure program that's been rolled out in Pakistan? Do you think the same could happen security wise in Afghanistan? Are we looking at a similar uh, potential security risk for China?
I believe there is risk for the Chinese investment in Afghanistan unless we have some sort of a political setup, where we have included everybody, and in the setup everybody is happy, with or represented in the government. So that's essential, for any investment to be successful. Otherwise, somebody could kind of disrupt an investment or a project, and that will become a breaking news, I would rather say, as it's happening in Pakistan. Yeah, there's a huge risk for I think Chinese or any other international investment in Afghanistan.
Mm.
So uh, it's more, the political situation in Afghanistan right now that would kind of lead to insecurity for investment.
Mm, yeah, indeed. We were talking earlier about the nature of the contracts that are being signed between the Taliban regime and Chinese state-backed companies. Um, we didn't really go into it in any great depth. Are these contracts likely to survive? Do you think a change of regime, given the Taliban's illegitimacy at the moment? Um, who are they signing them on behalf of? And the corruption within the Taliban is, it's downplayed and down talked by very many players who have a voice in the international community, United Nations among them. Um, is it any different, do you think?
I think when it comes to the question of survival of these contracts, they will, especially the one that are backed by the state. I talked about INAC, Amu
Mm,
Darya, which was cancelled by the previous government,
yeah.
given back to the Chinese.
Mm,
Um, it was CNPCI which initially got the contract, and then somebody else stepped in to implement the contract, and then it was cancelled, and then it's given back to another Chinese company somehow related to CNPCI. So those strategic contracts will continue to kind of survive change of regime, because
mm,
the Chinese, along with being close to people in republic, they were close to the Taliban, who were opposing the government, and
mm,
probably they're in touch with a lot more. Their understanding of Afghanistan is good, and so they would kind of be in touch with people so that their investments continue. Investment survival is not, I think, that difficult. I think holding on to that strategic area is key for the Chinese. Though they're already,
mm,
as you talked about the security issue in North Ainak, recently, the Chinese who were working there, were scared by some. event there. So yeah, it's not going to be easy because Afghanistan needs to stabilize first.
Mm. Mm. Do you think that it's too late to bring transparency and integrity to Afghanistan's minerals sector? I mean, it's not like the Taliban care, and China certainly doesn't care.
Yeah, see, when it comes to transparency and integrity, it's a political will. If there is a political will for it, there will be, And
Mm.
at this point, I don't see a lot. Part of this comes because as I said, the legal framework is in flux. The institutional arrangements are not good enough to manage the sector, and then probably the leadership doesn't understand how important the mining sector of Afghanistan could be to transform Afghanistan into an economy, maybe over a period of 20 years, independent economy. Those are missing, they don't get it. People in Republic didn't get it because they thought they would continue to get cash from outside, so why bother about mining sector, and why develop it?
Mm.
The current regime thinks it's cash cow. Let's sell as much as you can, um,
Mm.
but without a vision, without properly putting everything in place so that you can manage the sector. The sector, as you rightly refer to it, it could lead to resource curse. Conflict is one important side of resource curse. If we don't have the right thing in place, we could experience that situation.
Yeah, indeed. Would it be better for all in that case if instead of the Chinese state, the big players like BHP, Rio Tinto, Australia's Andrew Forrest, who was always hovering around the Republic on China's behalf, if they were willing to take the risk in Afghanistan? I mean, they could even say to their shareholders, well, the UN says it's peaceful there now, so let's go on in. Would it be worth their while? And would it be good for Afghanistan?
Yeah, so those big companies, some of them have signed up to the Extractive Industry Transparency Initiative. They adhere to those principles and all. They will kind of tell you what they're doing. Environment is properly managed. Community relationship is better. Revenue is properly given to the government. There's you can trace the money. So those companies coming forward would be a good sign for the country, for Afghanistan. It will boost
Mm.
the confidence of other investors to come to Afghanistan. So there's absolutely no doubt about it. But they will not, unless they are and their investors are assured of stable situation. And within that stability framework, the legal framework is very, very important, and business friendly environment, these are very key. Infrastructure and all those things come late. Sometimes big companies can build 25% of country's infrastructure. I'm
Mm.
talking in Afghanistan context, where we still lack a lot of things. um,
Mm.
to them, infrastructure is not a big hurdle. The legal framework, stability are important factors that they would consider before they make any investment.
Yeah, and you can look at what's happened in Mongolia over the past few decades since the collapse of the Soviet Union, where the big miners did go in and explore and exploit and build the infrastructure to get the stuff out that they needed. It's an example, isn't it? Once the legal framework was trustworthy. Yeah. But speaking of Andrew Forrest, or Tiggy, as he seems to like to be known, his company Fortescue did huge deals with the Republic. So he was one international mining entrepreneur, if you like, magnate who did seem to have some faith in what he could achieve in Afghanistan. He was always described to me as a stalking horse for China anyway. Um, but those deals seemed to be very uh, monolithic, if you like. Can you describe what happened with him?
I looked at the MOU that was signed, and brief analysis of it, I think it was unprecedented. Even in the
Mm.
history of in
Mining.
entire history of the subcontinent in the past 500 years,
Yeah,
was such a
indeed.
it
Mm.
was a contract, but one-sided. It was binding the government of Afghanistan to give over 50% of mineral rights to this particular company. The tragedy of this was the company didn't have a presence in Afghanistan, no license, no office, nothing. And this,
Mm.
you saw the optic, the big guys all sitting, signing a MOU, whether the company being present in Afghanistan. And then, I think people at president level and vice president level, they talked about this as a very strategic one. And because the company agreed to develop other critical infrastructure in the country, telling the public, what were those infrastructure, how the company would do it, and then one of the president went on saying, this is not the end, we'll give the rest of the minerals as well, this
Mm.
is the time,
Mm.
the government had already signed over 1,000 contracts, it was confusion all over the places, um, and as I said, there was no presence of the company. Uh, there was no the company was not legally bound, to execute that, but the government was supposed to provide everything. So I can imagine that maybe about $100 million was exchanged, between people who, on behalf of the republic, promoted that company at that point in time. And for the company, that was a very bad deal. I'm sure somebody knew that this going to, if somebody unpack it, that will reflect so bad on the company to agree to getting off of the country without even committing a cent. How do you do that in public? I mean, a cent in public. I'm sure a lot happened, in the back. And the minister ended up with his family in Australia after the collapse of the government. Could have been one assurance given to the minister. Now he's every second day, despite the fact that he's a migrant like me, in Australia, every second day he has a dinner in a posh restaurant in Australia. So you get that, those signs.
Yeah. Mm. Well, it wasn't just the minister. I mean, who was also educated at the expense of that company. I think it was also family and relatives of much more senior officials in the final government. There was a lot under the table, I think, for an extraordinary deal that eventually collapsed.
Yes.
But hey ho, where
Yeah.
is it now? But moving on to what is going on now, you've recently written a couple of very interesting and detailed papers describing the involvement in the sector of people at the highest levels of the Taliban regime and their associates. I'm talking here of the Supreme Leader and Emir Haibatullah Akhundzada and one of his close cohorts and funders, Haji Bashir Noorzai, a convicted drugs trafficker who was serving a life sentence in the United States until a year ago when he was swapped for an American hostage who was being held by the Haqqani network. There's an awful lot going on there. Can you talk about in detail about what the situation is that prevails and the involvement now of the emir and the Ahaji in the minerals sector?
Thank you so much. So I will kind of give you open two windows at the same time to kind of also draw a comparison between the people in the previous regime and how people at the president level were kind of manipulated to give contracts out with the current one. I don't know how deep is the Amir involved in it, because right now he's heading a country that's still chaotic. M- Probably his priorities maybe kind of elsewhere, but people close to him probably are, trying to, make use of their connections to benefit from it. Haji Nurzai, Bashar Nurzai got this contract, and it was of interest to me. I did a study of the same mine, during the Republic, where Aji Kabir got the contract and never executed it. I was looking at it very closely. And so here after the change in regime, that contract is cancelled and it's given to a joint venture of Afghans, which is kind of owned by Aji Nurzai and another Chinese private investor. And they get the contract, with a promise that they would make a 310 million investment in 6 months. Impossible for any, unless you want to kind of have a chopper fly over it and throw all that money and calling that as an investment. That's the only situation. 310 million, talk to any mining engineer and geologist, they would kind of laugh it out. So that was one, and of course, I looked at the evaluation documents. So there was another company that won the bid based on the proposal, but the government decided to give it to Arjun Uzai. So that's the joint venture, I should say. So the joint venture winning a bid that was not supposed to be given to them is already a sign of political influence. So moving on to investment, it's almost 1 year now. I think 1 year. They've not invested much. They've got three drills. At max, they could cost $100,000, and that deposit requires specialized drills, to be there because it's a rocky bed for them to get samples, analyze, and then decide on investment. That's another side of it. But politically, yes, there's been political influence and contracting right now. The same would happen during President Ghani's time. You remember this Sodefco project given to Ashmat to process chrome in Afghanistan and then
Mhm.
export it.
Yeah. Mm.
President Karzai, the Ghuri Cement, his brother was a partner there. Similar was for Marshal Fahim, Kanuni, Dr. Abdullah, the head of parliament, the head of Senate or the upper house, the head of intelligence, the head of the minister of defense, the minister of interior, the minister of name any minister, name any MP, they would do similar things.
Mm.
Now
Mm.
I see the same
Mm.
footprints. Aji Bashir being close to the emir, getting contracts. Not this one. There are other big names. Who have got contracts, mining.
But this one in particular, you were alerted to it because it's a gold mine with gold that is almost impossible to extract in commercial amounts. Am I right?
Yes,
Mm.
yes. So, yes, coming back to this, see, the area is rocky for any. There's certainly a deposit.
Where is it exactly? Tell us a little bit more in detail where it is.
Chahar is the province. Chahab is the district where the deposit. The villages are Nuraba and Samti too, and so it's at the river bed. Okay, and it's very rocky. For drills to get samples out, they have to drill down 1,000 meters, or maybe
Mm.
more, to get the location of the deposit and the percentage of gold in each deposit. So uh, any sensible companies or serious company would at least make 1,000 or maybe 800 holes to make sure that they understand that the mine is feasible.
Mm.
Every drill that they make in the ground would cost them easily in thousands of dollars. Imagine 800. Let's say, be very conservative. Let's say, they make 500 holes. Each hole, drill would cost them about, five to $8,000. You multiply that, that's huge amount of money. And it will take years, to make those drills. It's not going to
Mm.
be a question of 6 months or 4 months. The plan was, Noor's, the Afghan side of the joint venture wanted to get some quick cash. The Chinese side as well thought, that they would discover gold and sell it to a senior mining company. So the junior and senior is, junior mining companies come and do exploration and identify deposit and then sell it to a senior. And they, with the kind of approach they took, they did not find any gold. So now my sources tell me that those who are making drills are throwing some gold in each side and then rediscover that as a gold belonging to the deposit and telling outsiders that they found gold. That's not going to work. Any sensible mining company would come and study the area before they make any commitment. So
Mm.
that's the technical side and the political side of it. And these kind of investments will not work. The government has to get serious. They need to have proper procedures, regulations for, allowing investment, monitoring, proper inspection, until the mine ends, is fully exploited. Those who have managed, their mineral resources to be a national wealth or transform into national wealth, they have taken a lot of pain, to put in place legal framework, institutions, and
Mm.
all the monitoring capacity or management, structure in place to manage the mining sector, to avoid a
Mm.
resource curse, to put it that way.
Mm. But this mine that you describe,
Yeah.
as it's being, the mine itself is not really being exploited. Potential investors are being exploited. It sounds to me like what opportunity this mine offers is the creation of a pyramid scheme, so that if you're pretending that you're extracting a level of gold and showing that to potential investors as, look what we're getting out of this, you're ripping them off, and it's just another fake, corrupt money making scheme that is benefiting people at the very highest levels of the Taliban regime. No different.
Yeah, exactly. So, you bring in an investor and then take their money away. That's not going to send a very good sign. That's exactly what happened during previous regime. The Koisafi mine that I, researched on, the chrome mine,
Mm.
the Afghan side brought in an investor from UAE and took away all his money and left him with nothing. And then the person was influential and tried to get in touch with the president to get his money back. I think he didn't get it. So similar is this situation. The Chinese now find themselves, in a very difficult situation, saying we've already spent some, maybe a couple of millions or a bit more, and just saying how do we recover that money. Plus, they've given this, they've deposited some performance bond, to the government to, I think, 1.5 million. They're like saying, can we get our money back? Now there is nothing there. So uh, help us out.
Can we get our money back? Good luck with that one. Well, Javed, thank you so much for your time. I've really enjoyed talking to you about a sector that I have long had a very profound interest in. Starting from when I was in China as a specialist commodities reporter for Reuters, and so I was able to bring that knowledge of how the Chinese functioned in that sector to Afghanistan, and I have found it incredibly interesting and educative. And meeting you and being able to talk to you about it has been a privilege and a joy. So I thank you very much for your time today, for sharing your knowledge with us, and I wish you the best of luck.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your time and, reflecting Afghanistan still as an important place in the media. Thank you so much.
Bye, Javed.
Bye.
That was Javed Noorani, a researcher who's specialised for many years in the minerals and mining sector of Afghanistan and beyond. He talked about corruption in the sector that often brings with it the so-called resources curse and the differences between the Republic then and the Taliban regime now. And of course, what China is bringing to the party. I hope you enjoyed our discussion. That's all for now. I'm Lynne O'Donnell. Bye-bye.